Seahawks have a lot of big decisions to make this offseason, but potentially none bigger than what they're going to do at pick number 16. NFL.com draft analyst Lance Zierlein joins us now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Lance, how's it going?
Going well. How are you guys doing?
We're fantastic. Obviously, we've had a fun day of some spring training stuff to talk about, but we are diving deep on the Seahawks, and they have a really interesting offseason ahead. Before they even get to the draft, they need to kind of figure out what they want to do with Geno Smith. They may still keep him and then draft a quarterback. So let's start with the quarterback class this year. Lance, I'm assuming Caleb Williams is going to be long gone by the time pick 16 rolls around, but who could be available?
Well, I think that the way it's shaking out, my guess is that 4 quarterbacks are going to be off the board by the time Seattle picks. The order, I personally think it's going to lock in at Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Then I think it's going to be interesting to see if it's Drake May or J.J. McCarthy that goes next. And I think the guy who you would have seen some in Oregon out that way at least, Bo Nix, could be available at 16. Now, we know Seattle has a very well-known history of trading back, and you could still potentially trade back and land Bo Nix if you wanted quarterback. You might not have to do it with pick number 16. I don't think Michael Penix goes in the first. I just think the injury concerns and the background of his injury, the history, and the medicals, I think that's going to be too big a concern for a lot of teams. Plus, the tape was a little uneven at times. He's not very good outside of the pocket when he's on the move, but that doesn't mean that Seattle couldn't target him outside of the first round. So I think if you're looking at 16, my guess is Bo Nix will be available. It's also my guess that I will be the 4th quarterback, or that 4 will already be off the board. And I don't know if I see Seattle sitting there and taking the 5th quarterback off the board unless they have a really high grade on them. Because otherwise I just think, you'll trade back, add draft capital, and then if a player's still there you like at quarterback, you take him then after you've added some draft capital. So that's my guess is how that could play out.
Lance, I look at this this defense, and I imagine what Mike McDonald can do. Over there with the Baltimore Ravens, he had himself a pair of inside linebackers that were phenomenal. Jordan Brooks, I feel like, can fit what he wants to do. But after that, I'm saying that room's looking thin as heck, man. And I look at the number 16 and I go, well, they should probably go with the best available guy on defense. But I'm looking at LBs. Any LBs that caught your eye?
No, not in the first round. It's not a great year for linebacker, unfortunately. So I think if you're looking for linebackers, it's really not going to be in that round. So there's really, you do want to go find best available defensively. A lot of times head coaches, though, will kind of put pressure on GMs to draft on the other side of the ball because their thought is, I can find what will fit my system. I don't have to have the highest drafted player. We can find the guys that will make some sense. So it wouldn't shock me if McDonald was fine getting out of making the first round pick an offensive pick just because he knows what he's doing there. But I do think there's some talented players inside. Junior Colson, Michigan, I think is more of a second rounder. I think Jeremiah Trotter from, the son of Jeremiah Trotter is from Clemson, is going to be a very smart player who is going to go probably in the late second to early third. Edgerrin Cooper is a linebacker from Texas A&M that has some talent that could go second or third. But it's just not a great year. If you need linebacker, you ain't doing it in the first round. Not an inside backer, that's for sure.
Is there a player that you're projecting as a mid to late round player that you're especially curious about where he lands?
I would say, that's a good question. Well, I have higher grades on some players than other people do. And then what I'm really curious about, that curiosity will be, let me put it this way. My curiosity will be piqued once I see the heights, weights, speeds, athletic profiles of the players. That's when I'll become much more curious about where guys will land because there will be a little better understanding of what we're working with from a physical profile and an athletic profile. Then it turns into, you think about what's on tape, the strengths, the weaknesses, and some guys, every single year this happens where I have to differentiate between how, what a player's weaknesses are, what he does well, and then where the scheme, who might be willing to jump up and get a guy. I think if I had to have one guy that I'm most interested in terms of the conversation that we're having now, I'd say probably Graham Barton, an offensive lineman out of Duke. He can play tackle, guard, or center. And really, he's a fit at guard or center. But he's one of the ones I'm most interested in. And then the other one would probably be Tyler Guyton, a tackle from Oklahoma. I think he could shoot way up the board into the top 18, 19. But he's a little bit raw, so he could fall into the mid-20 range. So that one's another interesting one for me. And then also Troy Fautanu from Washington. He's going to be a guard. I don't think they'll keep him at tackle, but the left tackle from Washington is very physical, very broad player, fits the physical profile and nastiness of an NFL guard. I'm curious to see where teams have him. I have him as a late first, but I have a funny feeling that he may sneak up a little higher than that.
Lance, a lot of the times for quarterbacks, the combine is a formality, right? You got your top 5 guys, and you'll see where they land. Obviously, Caleb Williams heads this class in 2024. But is there a quarterback that people aren't really talking about? Because I look at the Seahawks and I go, okay, they might draft a quarterback, but probably later on in the draft, we shall see. It's only happened twice as John Schneider being the GM. But is there a quarterback you feel like isn't getting a lot of hype but could sneak on a roster?
That is one. It's a little incomplete for me because there's 2 quarterbacks I need to watch right like this week to get ready for combine. It's Keaton Slovis, who formerly played at USC, and then, of course, Jordan Travis, who's at Florida State. And I tell you, Travis is an interesting one because he was a guy that had some Heisman Trophy hype for a while, and then he got injured, and we know famously Florida State fell out of the contention for the national championship after his injury. But honestly, I don't hear anyone talking about him. I mean, he's really out of sight, out of mind, to the point that I wasn't even sure he was in the draft. And so I saw a combine list that's still one of the guys that I need to write up. And so it's been very, very quiet on the Jordan Travis front. So if there's one guy, it's not going to be a good year to find somebody outside of, once you're past Michael Penix. I'm not a believer in Spencer Rattler from South Carolina. I don't think he's a guy. Devin Leary. I could throw some names at you wouldn't care, and I don't think it's going to matter. But I do think that Jordan Travis is the one guy who is, for me, I want to get through his tape, but he's just quietly flying way under the radar due to his injury. And I'm really curious to see what the tape looks like this week when I get to study him. So he's one to at least keep in mind.
Yeah, really rooting for him. Speaking of Michael Penix, he's so confusing for me. I mean, I know that we have bias here in Seattle, Lance, where especially after the Sugar Bowl, people were like, oh, my God, this could be a top 5 pick. And then, of course, you have not only the national championship game, but kind of rumors about maybe scouts and front offices not being quite as high on him. How do you view Penix?
Well, so when you watch the tape, so what I do is I'll go watch all your touchdowns, your interceptions. But I really start with the deep throws, then I work to the intermediate throws, which I think are pro throws. I think the interesting thing right off the bat is that the concept that Grubb ran was unbelievable. Just great passing scheme. I just finished watching Jalen McMillan, and once again I was in awe of the passing scheme. And I think it was very beneficial to the wide receivers and to Penix, because he was able to throw into open spaces so often. But I do want to say, despite the injuries, Michael Penix really improved from his time at Indiana to Washington. He's become a more accurate passer. I think there are times like the Texas game where his touch is just phenomenal. I mean, maybe the best pure passing game I saw all year long. He was brilliant in that game. The problem with Michael Penix is the Michigan game. Once you heat him up, he doesn't take a lot of sacks. He's good at getting rid of the football. But once you heat Michael Penix up, it really gets muddy for him, and it's a problem. Once he has to move his feet and get outside the pocket, his completion percentage just plummets into the 20s. And that's a real concern because the NFL teams just don't let you sit there and do whatever you want in the pocket. That's just not going to happen. So I think the concern about Penix is that when he's allowed to throw, he's got a quick delivery. He can deliver the ball with good touch. He's got a nice catchable ball with a tight spiral, and at times can be really good with the placement. But the flip side of that is that I think it needs to be a little clean, like really clean for him. I think the right pieces need to be around him. And then there were times he just relied on Polk and McMillan, and especially at Dunze, where he just had one-on-one matchups. He saw pressure, and he just threw it up in the air and for a jump ball, and he knew his guys had a better chance of winning. That's not, there's not a great chance that his wide receiver is going to have such an advantage on the corners like he did at Washington. So I think the biggest concern with him is, can he play off structure? Can he play against a rush if the offensive line is not a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line like he had at Washington? And how do his medicals come out? And that's going to be a huge one. That's one you can't get around. But I think he has day 2 talent. I don't think he'll go in the first round, but I do think in the right situation, Michael Penix could end up being an NFL starter.
I'm glad you brought up Rome Odunze. Me being a former receiver, I always look at receiver play and pick the guys I like. And the 2 biggest names I feel like are Marvin Harrison and Rome, right? I look
Hold on. Before we go any further, what do you look for in a wide receiver?
One, I look to see how they attack leverage, if they understand what they're looking at. They're setting up their routes. Do they have a plan, and do they understand what they're looking at? And then I look at just playmaking ability. Your job description is to grab the football out the air. Like, can you make a play that you're not supposed to make? Technique, body control. I mean, just the foundation of being a receiver, because some guys are just good enough to where they can find space, you get it to them, and they make a play. Whereas other guys, you look at their offense, you got to be able to move guys out their spots and be a bit more of a technician. So I look at Rome and his offense, and I go, he can be a technician, but it didn't require him to be a technician. It's kind of like you just go up and make the play. Then I look at Marvin Harrison, and I go, you can see the technique in Marvin Harrison, right? He's polished up, his pedigree, and you know what happens at Ohio State. When you look at those two, who has a strength in some area and another guy? Like, what's the difference between those 2 guys, and what are their strengths?
Well, I mean, you nailed it. I think with Marvin Harrison, he's the son of a former wide receiver who was a great wide receiver. So he comes with a lot of polish. He is a technician. He can attack leverage. He does show an ability to get out of his breaks with pretty good quickness. Now, I don't think he's the most explosive. The most explosive receiver in the draft is Malik Neighbors to me.
Right.
But when it comes to being the most polished, it's definitely Marvin Harrison Jr. I think the ball skills are good, like you talked about. The route running is above average and headed in the right direction to being very good. And he just has a feel for being a pro, good feet around the boundary. When you look at Rome Odunze, I'm glad you mentioned it and that you see it as well. He kind of cruises sometimes. Like, he knows he's going to win the jump ball. You don't really have much of a chance. And I heard that he went and worked on rebound drills with the basketball teams to really tighten up body control and a feel for, body positioning. When the ball goes up, I mean, he completed over 60% of contested catches. That is he was, I want to say he was 21 of 30, or 20 of 30. That is an astounding number. First of all, I don't think he should have had that many that were contested. I think sometimes he just kind of cruises because he's not afraid to get into that jump ball battle. Once a team really gets on him and a wide receivers coach says, hey, we need you to start doing this with your route running. The first mistake I made in my evaluation stuff 10 years ago was worrying too much about route running. That's coachable. Unless a guy can't get in and out of breaks because of tightness with the hips and all that stuff, or the lack of agility or lack of burst, if he has the ability to do it, he's going to do it. He's going to get a lot better. That mistake I made was on Tyreek Hill, by the way, where I was worried about his route running. I mean, what an idiot I am for that. But so I learned that, look, Odunze is going to be able to run routes a lot better. What I love is when the ball's up, he is a dog. And he has a great feel, great instincts for where he needs to be. Anybody who's played basketball understands that rebounding is about instincts off the rim and where the body positioning needs to be. He's got that. The hands are extremely strong. And if you look at, I'm in Houston. I remember when DeAndre Hopkins was drafted, and the question was, well, he's a 4.5 40 guy. Can he run routes and get open? There's special players who are going to carve out the catch space, and you're not going to beat him in that space, and he's one of those guys. And those guys not only make it in the league, my comp on him is Larry Fitzgerald, because I see so much of his game I think could end up developing. He's going to run in a 4.4s. I think his game could truly develop into a Larry Fitzgerald type of game.
Lance, we look to your comps and your write-ups on these guys always during draft season, so it's always very cool to put a voice to the name. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Lance.
Sure. The pleasure joining you guys. Thanks for having me.
See ya.